I guess how I would describe God more as this kind of intelligent, loving awareness that is the seat of our experience. And that is the same and ubiquitous within all of us. And I find that individuals, for whatever reason, that have had personal experiences where they really get to taste that, it is a very like blissful place within oneself. And to me, that is kind of the God worth talking about, because it's a place, whatever you want to call it. And I don't think God is a useful term, because it's been so just used for so many different ways of trying to arrive at describing this place. But I do think that at least in describing it in that way is a really useful thing to be able to hear from other people and their personal experience, and to see how it can maybe point to a place within yourself that is also available to experience that, and the byproducts of what come from tasting and experiencing that place within ourselves. And so, I've been fortunate to sit down with a lot of spiritual teachers, Advaita Vedantic, non-dual teachers as well. And I suppose that is a little bit more of my pursuit, the pursuit that I find interesting when it comes to living a life of wisdom and knowing who we are in our essence.
I mean, for what it's worth, I think a lot of religious traditions will equally condemn this bearded man in the sky image of God. Sure. I mean, that is an image that is conjured up by non-believers. It's literally a caricature. I mean, if you picture the Catholic God, you're probably picturing something like, the roof of the Sistine Chapel, this bearded man. But within Catholic theology, there's a sort of there's so much discussion about the nature of God, and it's just not even close to something like that, And when people talk in secular terms about oneness and unity and connection and goodness, and how truth and beauty are kind of the same thing. This is what Catholic theologians have been saying for centuries too. It's just that our vision of the religious debate has been so warped by the new atheism movement of the sort of 2000s, which was very much about science versus scriptural literalism and sort of modern religious political movements. That was the sort of battle that was going on. But the discussion about the nature of God on a theological level, I think, wasn't shifted at all there. I can't remember who it is that said something like that Richard Dawkins had never written a word about God, not once. I can't remember who said it. Someone fairly well known, I think, but saying like in all of his career, Richard Dawkins has never said a single word about God. And I guess that's trying to capture what I'm hinting at here, which is that a lot of people would agree with you that that's not what God should be looked like. That's not how God should be envisioned. So
I guess you're very unique in the aspect that you've studied so much theology, taking more of an atheistic position. I'm just curious, what have you learned from your study of theology that I guess has shifted perspective of you of how you personally live your life, in the most powerful way, if you had to pick one thing, irrespective of you believing the place and it's of where it came from, or where it's being grounded in an objective truth,
Well, one thing is that I think there's much more legitimacy in a religious worldview than I would have thought when I was younger. And I don't know if that's more due to studying it or just due to sort of age and experience, but I remember waltzing into university at sort of 18, 19 years old, and I had this YouTube channel where I talked about atheism and feeling like, I'm pretty good at this stuff, man. I can do the religious debate. And meeting just meeting people and interacting with tutors as well, who were quite obviously deeply committed to their religious worldview. And interestingly, the higher up I looked in the academic space at things like philosophy of religion, it's sort of self-selecting, because if you're an atheist, like you just said, it's a bit strange to study theology. And so the further you go, if somebody spent the last 8 years doing a PhD in something really specific, chances are they probably believe it, because if they didn't, they wouldn't put the effort in. And so everyone that I'm talking to who really knows what they're talking about, to the extent that they've been studying it for so long, are going to be believers. And so I was learning about these arguments I wasn't aware existed. I was learning about approaches to the discussion that completely upended the way that I was talking about it. And what that did, the way that it changed me, in other words, is that now I think I'm much more able to meet people where they're at. You know, if I'm talking to Richard Dawkins about theology or religion, it's very much man in the sky, science, God of the gaps, evolution, that kind of discussion. When I have, you know, I don't know, if I speak to Jordan Peterson or something, that kind of language, if you've ever seen Jordan Peterson and Richard Dawkins have a conversation about God and religion, it just doesn't even get off the ground because they just can't connect. I think I'm much more able now to sort of switch between those approaches and recognize that, okay, maybe when he says God, maybe when Jordan Peterson says God, he doesn't mean God. A lot of people criticize him because, you know, he uses religious language, but he uses it totally illegitimately. You know, like when he says things like, you're not really an atheist because you don't act like an atheist. People say, whatever you're calling God, Jordan Peterson, is just not what most people call God. Funnily enough, the same criticism isn't put forward to Richard Dawkins. When Richard Dawkins says, you know, this old man in the sky who's murdering people and commanding genocides, people don't make the same criticism that well, whatever you're calling God there is not what we think God is. And so I guess I'm willing to suspend that skepticism more now and have conversations from different angles and be less, I guess, forthright about not only my views but also my approach to the conversation.
Yeah, I always respect somebody, no matter how, I guess, firm in their belief or how much background they've spent. If somebody can approach a dialogue or conversation with somebody really with just the willingness to be changed by what they hear, which is like how you actually truly listen, then to me, like how else are you otherwise going to have an authentic dialogue instead of just, you know, just living life in like a debate style format, which can have its moments for sure, but like living your whole life in that kind of sounds like really sucky.
Yeah, and it's not very productive either, because especially when you're an atheist, it's easy enough to just be poking holes in other people's worldviews, but you're not erecting anything in its place.
Yeah.
You know, you've got nothing to work with. And that's one of the criticisms that New Atheism has now, is that it's torn down so much and in its place, nothing. I mean, Sam Harris tried it with The Moral Landscape. That's great. It's a good project. It's like, here's something to put in its place. But most of the rest of it was just sort of broad hand waving. Oh, if we get rid of religion, we can sort of do secular humanism, whatever that even is. You know, there's no real attempt to actually construct something. How are we now going to live? That's what people are interested in, man. Like, people say, like, they want to know what's true, and sure, yeah, people do. It's interesting, but what people really want and need generally is to know how to live. And if philosophy is supposed to be for any purpose, it has to be something like that. I mean, are you just doing philosophy to know true things? That's fine if you are, but I think that the more interesting and useful kind of philosophy is the philosophy that tells you how to live. There was a great question on an ethics paper once that I saw at university. I didn't take this question, but it was in the ethics exam, and the question was something like, does studying ethics make you a more moral person? And if not, what's the point? And implicitly, yeah, you could study ethics as an academic discipline and yet have absolutely no change in how ethical a person you are, let's say. So then what are you doing? What is the point in doing that? Maybe it's like interesting to get to grips with moral, you know, definitions and psychology and stuff. Yeah, sure, that's an interesting pursuit. But if we're talking about doing ethics, surely it's got to be more than that.